My fiancée didn't close the app, and I saw a conversation with her ex that changed our wedding plans. Her phone was face up on the kitchen counter when I walked in from the garage, the screen still glowing with an open message thread. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't looking for anything. I'd just come inside to grab a water bottle before finishing the lawn, and her phone was right there, unlocked, displaying a conversation that made my entire body go cold. The name at the top said Garrett, and the message I could see without even picking up the device read, "I can't stop thinking about last weekend. 3 days until you're stuck with him forever, and we both know that's not what you really want." My hands were still dirty from the yard work, grass stains on my palms, and I stood there staring at those words like they were written in a language I'd never learned. Olivia was upstairs taking a shower. I could hear the water running through the ceiling. We were supposed to meet the florist in 2 hours to finalize the centerpieces for our wedding, which was scheduled for exactly 9 days from now. 9 days until I married the woman I'd been with for 4 years, the woman I'd proposed to on a beach in Hawaii, the woman whose phone was currently showing me evidence that everything I believed about my life was a carefully constructed lie. I'd been planning this wedding with Olivia for the past 11 months, ever since she'd said yes, and we'd started the endless process of turning a simple celebration into the elaborate production that modern weddings apparently required. We'd booked the venue 13 months in advance, a historic estate with gardens and a ballroom, capacity for 200 guests. We'd sent save the dates, hired a photographer, selected a DJ, tasted 17 different cake flavors, argued about the guest list, compromised on the color scheme, and spent approximately $35,000 on what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. My parents had contributed $15,000, her parents had matched it, and we'd scraped together the rest from our savings. The invitations had gone out 6 weeks ago. The RSVPs were nearly all in. My brother was flying in from Seattle to be my best man. Her sister had already purchased her maid of honor dress. We'd written our vows, practiced our first dance, and finalized the seating chart. Everything was locked in, confirmed, scheduled, and paid for. And now I was standing in our kitchen, staring at a message from someone named Garrett that suggested none of it was real. I picked up her phone with shaking hands, my thumbs leaving dirt smudges on the screen as I scrolled up through the conversation. The messages went back weeks, months, actually. I kept scrolling, watching the timeline unspool, each message making my stomach clench tighter. Garrett wasn't just some ex she'd stayed friendly with. This was ongoing, intimate, detailed conversations about their feelings for each other, about the physical relationship they were apparently still having, about her doubts regarding our engagement. There were messages from 3 months ago where she told him she was confused about her feelings. Messages from 6 weeks ago where they'd met up while I was away on a business trip. Messages from last weekend, when she'd supposedly been at a bachelorette spa day with her bridesmaids. The messages weren't explicit in a pornographic way, but they were worse somehow. They were emotional. They were real. They showed a version of Olivia I'd never seen, vulnerable and uncertain, and completely different from the confident, decisive woman who'd been planning our wedding with such enthusiasm. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I had maybe 5 minutes before she came down, dried and dressed and ready to leave for the florist appointment. My mind raced through options, all of them terrible. I could confront her right now, start a fight that would inevitably escalate into the kind of screaming match that would wake the neighbors. I could pretend I hadn't seen anything, go through the motions of the florist meeting and the wedding preparations while secretly dying inside. I could call off the wedding, cancel everything, lose the deposits, humiliate both our families, and destroy 4 years of relationship in a single afternoon. Or I could do what I ended up doing, which was take my own phone out of my pocket, photograph the message thread, scroll back through weeks of conversations, and photograph all of it, creating a digital record of her betrayal that I could reference later when she inevitably denied everything. My hands were still shaking as I took screenshot after screenshot, capturing evidence of the double life she'd been living while I'd been choosing napkin colors and writing heartfelt vows. The water stains from my thumbs stayed on her phone screen after I set it back down exactly where I'd found it. I wiped them off with my shirt, repositioned the phone to match my memory of its original angle, and walked back outside to the garage like I was moving through water. Everything felt slow and thick and unreal. I sat down on the garage steps, pulled up the photos I'd just taken, and started reading through them more carefully. The conversation with Garrett painted a picture I couldn't reconcile with the woman I thought I knew. Olivia had been the one to push for marriage, had been the one excited about wedding planning, had been the one posting photos of her ring on social media and gushing to her friends about our future together. But these messages told a different story. They showed someone who was torn, uncertain, maybe even coerced into a commitment she didn't actually want. Garrett kept asking her why she was going through with the wedding if she still had feelings for him. Her responses were non-committal and vague, saying things like, "It's complicated and I don't know what I want, and maybe this is just cold feet. Everyone gets nervous." Olivia appeared in the garage doorway 15 minutes later, hair still damp, wearing the yellow sundress she knew I loved. She smiled at me, asked if I was ready to go, commented on how nice the lawn looked. I stood up, pocketed my phone, and told her I was ready. We drove to the florist in her car, the same vehicle where she'd apparently driven to meet Garrett last weekend while lying to me about her location. She chattered about centerpiece options, debated between roses and peonies, asked my opinion on greenery arrangements. I responded in monosyllables, my mind somewhere else entirely, running through the implications of what I'd discovered. How long had this been going on? Was the entire relationship a lie? Or just the recent months? Did she actually love me at all? Or was I just the safe choice while Garrett was the exciting one? Were there other people I didn't know about? How many of the late nights at work or weekends with friends had actually been meetings with her ex? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, each one spawning 3 more until my head felt like it might split open from the pressure. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. The florist appointment was torture. Olivia deliberated between bouquet styles while I sat there drowning in information she didn't know I had. The florist, a cheerful woman in her 50s named Patricia, showed us photos of previous weddings she'd done, talked about seasonal availability and color palettes, asked questions about our vision for the big day. Olivia answered enthusiastically, describing the aesthetic she wanted, the romantic garden atmosphere, the photos she'd saved on Pinterest for inspiration. I watched her perform this role of excited bride and wondered how much of it was real. Was she genuinely looking forward to marrying me? Or was this all just momentum, social obligation, the path of least resistance? The messages with Garrett suggested she was deeply conflicted, but sitting here watching her debate between dusty rose and blush pink flowers, you'd never know she had any doubts at all. She was either a phenomenal actress or genuinely compartmentalized enough to be 2 completely different people, depending on her audience. We finalized the flower order, confirmed the delivery times, and paid the deposit. Olivia held my hand on the drive home, talked about how beautiful everything was going to be, how she couldn't wait for our families to see the venue all decorated. I drove in silence, my mind churning through scenarios. That evening, after she'd gone to bed early claiming a headache, I sat in my home office and went through the screenshots again more carefully. I created a document, organizing the messages chronologically, highlighting the ones that seemed most damning. There were 43 messages where she explicitly talked about missing Garrett, 18 where she referenced physical intimacy between them, 6 where she questioned whether she was making the right choice marrying me, and 1, from just 5 days ago, where Garrett had written, "You can still back out. We can leave town together, start over somewhere new. I'll take care of everything." Her response had been, "You know I can't do that. Too many people involved, too much already planned. But God, sometimes I wish I could." That message hit harder than all the others combined. She wasn't staying with me because she loved me. She was staying because it was too complicated to leave. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, so I did what any rational person would do in the age of digital everything. I hired a private investigator. I found a firm online called Clearview Investigations, run by a former police detective named Gregory Nash, with 23 years of experience in surveillance and infidelity cases. I called them Monday morning, explained the situation, sent over the screenshots, and asked them to follow Olivia for a week to document her activities. Nash was professional and straightforward, no judgment in his voice as he outlined the process, and quoted me $3,000 for comprehensive surveillance, including photo and video documentation. It was money we'd been planning to use for the honeymoon, but that seemed like a distant fantasy now. I paid the retainer and gave him Olivia's schedule, her car details, her workplace address, everything he'd need to track her movements without her knowledge. He promised to have preliminary findings within 72 hours. The wedding was 8 days away. Nash called me Wednesday evening with an update. He'd followed Olivia from her office to a restaurant downtown, where she'd met Garrett for lunch. They'd spent 90 minutes together, and Nash had photos of them sitting close in a booth, her hand on his arm, both of them laughing at something. After lunch, they'd walked to a parking garage, where according to Nash's observations, they'd spent 35 minutes in Garrett's car before Olivia drove back to her office. The photos were time-stamped and geotagged, indisputable evidence that she was still seeing him, still lying about her whereabouts. Nash sent me the files electronically, professional quality images that showed my fiancée being intimate with another man less than a week before our wedding. I sat there in my office looking at those photos and felt something inside me go completely numb. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even hurt. It was just this cold, analytical clarity. I needed to protect myself legally and financially before I did anything else. Thursday morning, I called a family law attorney named Diana Frost, a partner at a firm that specialized in divorce and prenuptial agreements. We weren't married yet, so technically this wasn't her area, but she agreed to consult with me about my options. I showed her the messages, the PI photos, everything. She listened carefully, took notes, and then gave me the hard truth. Since we weren't married, I had no legal recourse for the infidelity itself. But I could potentially recover some of the wedding expenses if I could prove she'd entered into the engagement under false pretenses or had committed fraud. The challenge would be demonstrating financial harm beyond the emotional damage. Frost suggested documenting every expense related to the wedding, getting statements from vendors about cancellation policies and lost deposits, and creating a clear paper trail showing my financial investment in a marriage she apparently had no intention of honoring. She also advised me to consider the broader implications. If I confronted Olivia now, she could claim cold feet or stress and promise to end things with Garrett. If I went through with the wedding, I'd be entering a marriage I knew was built on lies. The only real option, in Frost's professional opinion, was to cancel the wedding and pursue whatever financial recovery I could manage. I asked Frost about the timing. We were 6 days out from the ceremony. The venue had a cancellation clause that required 30 days' notice for any refund. The caterer had a 2-week policy. The photographer, the DJ, the florist, all had different terms. Canceling now meant losing probably 70% of what we'd spent, somewhere around $25,000 just gone. But going through with it seemed insane. Frost suggested a third option that I hadn't considered: public exposure at the wedding itself. It was dramatic, possibly vindictive, but it would serve multiple purposes. It would prevent the marriage from being finalized, it would explain to our families and friends why I was backing out, and it would place the social and reputational consequences squarely on Olivia where they belonged. Frost had seen it done before in cases where one party discovered infidelity right before the ceremony. The spurned partner would expose the truth during the vows or the reception, show evidence to the assembled guests, and let social pressure do the rest. It was nuclear, but it was effective. I told her I'd think about it. That evening, Olivia wanted to go over the final timeline for the wedding day. We sat at the dining room table with her elaborate planning binder, reviewing minute-by-minute schedules for hair and makeup, photography sessions, the ceremony itself, the cocktail hour, the reception. She'd put so much work into this, color-coded tabs and printed itineraries and backup plans for weather contingencies. Looking at her bent over this binder, I saw someone who'd invested tremendous energy into the performance of getting married without actually committing to the substance of marriage itself. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. How could she plan centerpieces and guest favors while texting her ex about running away together? How could she write vows promising eternal fidelity while meeting him in parking garages? I wanted to grab the binder and throw it across the room, watch all her careful planning scatter across the floor in chaos. Instead, I nodded along and confirmed the timeline and pretended everything was fine. Friday brought another update from Nash. He'd followed Olivia to Garrett's apartment Thursday night, watched her go inside, and not emerge for 3 hours. The timestamp showed she'd been there from 7 until past 10 in the evening, during which time she'd texted me saying she was having dinner with coworkers and would be home late. Nash had photos of her entering the building, photos of lights turning on in a third-floor apartment, photos of her leaving with disheveled hair and different clothes than she'd worn going in. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. This wasn't cold feet or wedding stress. This was a fully engaged affair that she had no intention of ending. I asked Nash to do one more thing. I asked him to follow Garrett, get information about his life, his job, his situation. If I was going to blow this up, I wanted complete information about everyone involved. Nash called back Saturday with a profile on Garrett that added whole new dimensions to the situation. Garrett Hutchinson, 31 years old, worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a leased Audi, lived in a high-rise apartment he could barely afford based on the financial records Nash had pulled from public sources. More interestingly, Garrett was engaged to someone else, a woman named Stephanie who worked as a dental hygienist and had no idea her fiancé was seeing his ex-girlfriend. Nash had found their engagement announcement in the local paper from 8 months ago, around the same time the messages between Olivia and Garrett had intensified. So this wasn't even a simple case of Olivia choosing between me and her ex. This was both of them maintaining dual relationships, both planning weddings to other people while continuing their affair on the side. The layers of deception multiplied exponentially. I wondered if Stephanie knew, if she'd seen signs, if she was having the same crisis I was having. On impulse, I asked Nash to find her contact information. If I was going to detonate this bomb, everyone affected deserved to know the truth. Sunday afternoon, 4 days before my wedding, I called Stephanie. I'd rehearsed what to say, tried to find words that wouldn't sound insane, settled on a version of the truth that was direct and verifiable. I told her my name, told her I was engaged to Garrett's ex-girlfriend, told her I'd discovered they were still involved and thought she deserved to know. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she asked me to prove it. I sent her the screenshots, the PI photos, everything. She called back 20 minutes later, her voice shaking with rage and grief. She'd suspected something was off, she said. Garrett had been distant lately, emotionally unavailable, making excuses about work stress and wedding planning pressure. She'd dismissed her intuition, told herself she was being paranoid, trusted him when he said everything was fine. Now she had photographic evidence that her instincts had been right all along. We talked for over an hour, comparing notes, sharing information, processing our parallel betrayals. By the end of the conversation, we'd formed an unlikely alliance. We agreed to confront them together, publicly, in a way that would ensure they couldn't lie their way out of the consequences. Stephanie's wedding was scheduled for 2 weeks after mine, same kind of elaborate production with hundreds of guests and massive family investment. She suggested we coordinate our exposures, make them both face the truth in front of everyone who'd been deceived. But I had a different idea. My wedding was in 4 days. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Wednesday night, with both families attending, the wedding party all together, everyone gathered in one place. That would be the perfect moment to reveal everything, to show the evidence to the people who mattered most, to make sure Olivia couldn't spin this into some private misunderstanding between us. The rehearsal dinner was being held at an upscale Italian restaurant, private room booked for 50 people, my parents paying for the whole thing. I could hijack the traditional toasts, use that public platform to display the truth, and let the consequences unfold in real time. Stephanie agreed to attend as my guest, to corroborate the story and share her own evidence about Garrett. Together, we could create an undeniable narrative that would protect us both from being painted as the villains in this scenario. Monday and the wedding was 3 days away. Olivia was a hurricane of activity, finalizing last-minute details, confirming vendor arrivals, packing for the honeymoon we'd never take. I moved through the motions mechanically, responding when spoken to, agreeing to whatever she suggested, internally preparing for Wednesday night. I'd created a presentation on my laptop, a carefully organized slideshow of evidence that would tell the complete story. Screenshots of messages arranged chronologically, PI photos with timestamps and locations, a timeline showing the overlap between Olivia's affair with Garrett and our wedding planning. Documentation of Garrett's engagement to Stephanie, proving this wasn't just an ex-boyfriend who couldn't let go. I practiced my speech, the words I'd say when I stood up during the toasts at the rehearsal dinner. I wanted to be calm, factual, devastating. No histrionics, no emotional breakdown, just cold presentation of irrefutable evidence, followed by the simple statement that I would not be marrying someone who'd spent our entire engagement lying to me. My brother flew in on Monday evening, excited about the wedding, completely unaware of the catastrophe brewing. I picked him up from the airport, and he immediately started talking about his toast, the funny stories he planned to tell about us growing up, how happy he was that I'd found someone like Olivia. I let him talk, unable to tell him the truth yet, knowing that Wednesday night would shatter his illusions along with everyone else's. He stayed at our house that night, slept in the guest room, woke up on rehearsal dinner day cheerful and energetic. Olivia made breakfast for all of us, played the role of gracious hostess, laughed at my brother's jokes, and talked about how much she was looking forward to officially being part of our family. The performance was so convincing that I almost doubted my own evidence. Almost. Wednesday arrived with cruel sunshine and perfect weather, the kind of beautiful autumn day that would have been perfect for a wedding. The rehearsal at the venue went smoothly, everyone walking through their positions, the wedding coordinator directing traffic, my mother crying happy tears at the thought of her son getting married. Olivia stood beside me at the altar, practicing our positions, and I looked at her thinking about how different this moment would have been if she'd just been honest. If she'd told me months ago that she still had feelings for Garrett, that she wasn't sure about us, we could have ended things cleanly. Painful, but clean. Instead, she'd chosen deception, and that choice had led us here, to the edge of public disaster. After the rehearsal, we all headed to the restaurant for the dinner. 50 people crammed into a private room, wine flowing, appetizers circulating, everyone in high spirits. Stephanie arrived as planned, introduced herself as my colleague from work, blended into the crowd. Olivia didn't recognize her, had no idea she was Garrett's fiancée, no reason to suspect anything unusual. Dinner proceeded through multiple courses, conversation loud and celebratory, my father making jokes about finally getting me off their financial books, Olivia's mother tearing up while talking about how beautiful her daughter looked. The toasts were scheduled to begin after the main course, traditionally starting with the parents and then moving to the best man and maid of honor. I'd arranged with the restaurant manager to have a projector and screen set up, ostensibly for a slideshow of photos from our relationship. Nobody questioned it. Romantic slideshows were standard at rehearsal dinners. When the moment came, I stood up with my laptop, connected it to the projector, and asked for everyone's attention. My hands were surprisingly steady as I began to speak. "I'd like to share something with all of you tonight," I said. "Something I discovered recently that's changed my perspective on this wedding." The room went quiet, people assuming this was the lead-in to some romantic declaration. I clicked to the first slide, a screenshot of Olivia's message thread with Garrett, blown up large enough for everyone to read. The gasps were audible. Olivia's face went white. I advanced through the slides methodically, showing message after message, each one time-stamped and undeniable. I narrated the timeline, explained how I'd discovered the open app on her phone, hired a private investigator, documented the ongoing affair. The PI photos came next, images of Olivia and Garrett at lunch, in his car, entering his apartment. I stated facts without editorial, let the evidence speak for itself. When I reached the slides about Garrett being engaged to someone else, I gestured to Stephanie, who stood and confirmed that she was indeed Garrett's fiancée, that she'd been equally betrayed, that neither of us had known about the other until this week. The room was dead silent except for my voice and the quiet sobbing that had started from somewhere near Olivia's side of the table. Her mother stood up, face twisted in shock and fury, started to say something to her daughter. Olivia's father just sat there, frozen. My parents looked devastated, not because the wedding was off, but because they genuinely liked Olivia and felt the betrayal almost as personally as I did. Olivia found her voice finally, started to stammer excuses and explanations, said the messages weren't what they looked like, claimed nothing physical had happened, insisted she loved me, and this was all a terrible misunderstanding. I let her talk, then advanced to the final slide. It was a screenshot of her message to Garrett from 2 days ago, Monday evening, after she knew I'd been acting strange, but before she knew I'd discovered everything. The message read, "He's being weird and distant. I think he might know something. If this all falls apart, are you serious about leaving town together?" Garrett's response, "Absolutely. Say the word and we're gone. I've got money saved. We could be in Mexico by the weekend." I read those messages aloud to the room, then looked at Olivia and said simply, "This wedding is canceled. I'm sorry to everyone who made plans and purchased gifts and invested time and emotion in celebrating what I thought was a real relationship. But I won't marry someone who's been planning an escape route with her ex while writing vows promising me forever." The aftermath was chaos. Olivia's family rushed to her defense, then to attack her, then to defend her again, unable to settle on a unified response to the humiliation. My family gathered around me, supportive and protective, asking what I needed, how they could help. Stephanie left quietly, her purpose served, her own confrontation with Garrett scheduled for later that week. Friends and extended family filtered out of the restaurant in shocked clusters, everyone trying to process what they'd just witnessed. I stayed until the end, settling the bill, apologizing to the restaurant manager for the disruption, gathering my things with mechanical precision. Olivia tried to approach me several times, was blocked by my brother and my father, eventually left with her parents who looked completely shattered. I drove home alone, walked into the house we'd shared for 2 years, and started packing her belongings. She called 43 times that night. I didn't answer once. The next morning, Thursday, I began the process of canceling the wedding. I called every vendor, explained that the event was off, negotiated whatever refunds were possible. The venue kept their deposit per the contract terms. The caterer refunded 60%. The photographer, who I'd always liked, refunded the entire payment and said she admired my integrity. The florist kept half. The DJ refunded everything except the booking fee. In total, I recovered about $11,000 of the $35,000 we'd spent. Olivia's parents called, demanding I split the losses with their daughter since technically she'd contributed to the costs. I politely declined, pointing out that she'd contributed to the costs while actively planning to potentially run away with someone else, which constituted fraud in my opinion. They threatened to sue. I told them to go ahead, that I'd be happy to share all the evidence with a judge. They didn't call back. My parents just hugged me and said the money didn't matter, that they were proud of me for choosing self-respect over social convention. My mother admitted she'd had doubts about Olivia, but hadn't wanted to say anything and risk ruining my happiness. Turns out Mother's intuition was more accurate than I'd realized. Olivia showed up at the house on Friday morning, using her key before I'd had a chance to change the locks. I was in the kitchen drinking coffee when she walked in, her eyes red from crying, her hair unwashed, looking genuinely destroyed. She sat down at the table and told me everything. She and Garrett had dated for 3 years before me, broke up because he wasn't ready to commit, stayed in touch as friends. When she and I started getting serious, Garrett had suddenly decided he'd made a mistake, that he wanted her back, but by then she was already invested in our relationship. She'd chosen to move forward with me, genuinely thought she was over him, believed she was making the right choice. But he'd kept reaching out, kept reminding her of what they'd had, and eventually she'd responded. The affair had started about 6 months ago, purely emotional at first, then physical, then comprehensive. She'd convinced herself she could have both, that she'd figure out what she really wanted eventually, that the wedding timeline would force a decision. But the decision never came. She'd kept pushing it off, avoiding the choice, hoping something would happen to make it clear. And now it had. I listened to all of this without interrupting, then told her she needed to leave. She asked if there was any possibility of working through this, of postponing the wedding and trying couples therapy, of salvaging what we'd built together. I reminded her that what we'd built was based on lies, that she'd been sleeping with someone else while planning to marry me, that she'd been willing to let me stand at an altar and commit my life to her while she maintained an exit strategy with another man. There was nothing to salvage. She was the person who did those things, and I was the person who deserved better. She cried harder, said she understood, asked if we could at least stay friends eventually. I told her no. She'd destroyed not just our relationship, but my ability to trust my own judgment about people. The best thing she could do now was pack her belongings and get out of my life completely. She left that afternoon with her sister's help, taking clothes and personal items, leaving furniture and shared purchases. I didn't care about this stuff. I just wanted her gone. Stephanie texted me that weekend with an update on her situation. She'd confronted Garrett with the evidence, shown him the same PI photos and screenshots I'd shown Olivia. Unlike Olivia, who'd tried to explain and excuse, Garrett had simply admitted everything and said he was sorry. He'd claimed he loved them both, couldn't choose, had hoped to figure it out eventually. Stephanie had kicked him out immediately, canceled her own wedding, and filed a police report for fraud regarding the ring he'd given her, which he'd apparently purchased with a credit card in her name without her knowledge. That investigation was ongoing. She'd also contacted his employer, a major pharmaceutical company with strict ethics policies, and reported the affair along with evidence that he'd been using company time and resources to facilitate it. Garrett had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. His life was unraveling just as thoroughly as Olivia's, and frankly, I felt nothing but satisfaction about that. They'd both chosen deception. They were both facing consequences. The weeks that followed were strange and empty. I'd been so focused on wedding planning for nearly a year that suddenly having nothing to plan for left me adrift. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, stayed late at the office, anything to avoid going home to a house that felt haunted by the future that didn't happen. Friends checked in regularly, offered to take me out for drinks or distraction, told me I was better off finding out before the marriage rather than after. They were right, objectively. But knowing you dodged a bullet doesn't make you feel less shot at. My brother extended his visit by a week, just keeping me company, helping me box up the last of Olivia's things, being present without demanding conversation. It helped more than I could articulate. Eventually, he had to go back to Seattle, back to his own life, and I was left alone to figure out who I was without the identity of fiancé or soon-to-be husband. 3 months later, I was functioning normally again, or at least performing functionality well enough that most people couldn't tell the difference. I'd started seeing a therapist named Dr. Raymond Cole, a psychologist who specialized in relationship trauma and trust issues. He helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just a breakup, but a fundamental betrayal that would take time to process and heal from. He validated my anger, my sense of violation, my difficulty trusting anyone's stated intentions. He also helped me see that Olivia's choices reflected her character flaws, not some deficiency in me. I hadn't failed to be enough for her. She'd failed to be honest about what she wanted and who she was. That distinction mattered. It shifted the shame and inadequacy I'd been carrying back where it belonged, onto her. The therapy helped. Slowly, gradually, I started feeling less broken and more just changed, shaped by the experience into someone more cautious, but also clearer about my boundaries and expectations. I ran into Olivia once, about 5 months after the canceled wedding, at a mutual friend's birthday party I'd forgotten she'd also been invited to. She looked different, thinner and harder somehow, her smile not reaching her eyes. She approached me carefully, asked how I was doing, said she'd been thinking about me. I told her I was fine, kept the conversation brief and cordial, excused myself quickly. Later, a friend told me Olivia had asked about me, wondered if I was seeing anyone, mentioned that she and Garrett had tried to make things work, but it had fallen apart spectacularly within weeks, once the thrill of the forbidden was gone. She'd apparently realized, too late, that what she'd had with him was sustained by the drama of the affair, that without the sneaking around and the dual lives, they had nothing substantial to build on. The friend seemed to think I'd find this information satisfying, proof that Olivia had gotten what she deserved. Instead, I just felt tired. Her unhappiness didn't make me happy. It just made the whole situation feel even more pointless and wasteful. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. The money I recovered from the canceled wedding vendors, plus the money I'd saved for the honeymoon, went into a down payment on a small condo in a different neighborhood. I needed a space that wasn't filled with memories of her, wasn't haunted by the future we'd planned. The new place was mine alone, decorated according to my actual preferences rather than compromise, a physical manifestation of starting over. I adopted a dog, a rescue mutt named Cooper, who'd been abandoned and needed someone as much as I needed him. We developed routines together, morning runs and evening walks, the kind of uncomplicated companionship that felt safe and healing. Work promoted me to a senior position with more responsibility and significantly better pay. Life reconstructed itself around the hole where the wedding and Olivia had been, not the same as before, but functional and occasionally even good. Stephanie and I stayed in touch, not as close friends, but as occasional correspondents who'd been through something unique together. She'd moved to a different city for a fresh start, was seeing someone new who apparently treated her with actual respect and honesty, had forgiven herself for not seeing the warning signs with Garrett. She told me once that exposing the truth publicly the way we did was the best decision she'd ever made, that it had prevented her from spending years trapped in a marriage built on lies. I agreed. As painful and humiliating as that rehearsal dinner revelation had been, it had saved me from something infinitely worse. Better to be embarrassed for an evening than miserable for a lifetime. Better to be alone than to be with someone who saw you as a backup plan while they explored other options. The wedding that didn't happen became the best thing that never occurred in my life. I learned things from the experience that I couldn't have learned any other way. I learned that people can maintain elaborate double lives with disturbing ease, that compartmentalization is a skill some people develop to expert levels. I learned that wedding planning and relationship building are not the same thing, that someone can enthusiastically plan a ceremony while simultaneously undermining the commitment it represents. I learned that gut feelings and red flags deserve attention even when you desperately want to ignore them, that intuition is often your subconscious processing information your conscious mind wants to deny. Most importantly, I learned that discovering the truth, no matter how devastating, is always better than living in a beautiful lie. Olivia could have married me, hidden her relationship with Garrett indefinitely, maintained the facade for years while slowly destroying me from the inside. The unmuted phone app, the visible message thread, the tiny technological failure that exposed everything had saved me from that fate. These days, when people ask about my almost wedding, I give them the abbreviated version. I found out she was cheating, canceled it, moved on. They usually express sympathy and admiration in equal measure, tell me I did the right thing, share their own stories of relationship betrayals and narrow escapes. What I don't usually mention is how close I came to ignoring what I'd seen, to convincing myself it was somehow explainable or forgivable, to going through with the wedding because canceling felt too hard and too public. The truth is, I almost took the easier path. I almost signed up for a marriage I knew was compromised because confronting the reality seemed more painful than living the lie. The only reason I didn't was because of that PI, that lawyer, that evidence so overwhelming I couldn't rationalize it away. Without the documentation, I might have convinced myself I'd misunderstood. I needed the proof to overcome my own desperate desire to believe everything was fine. There's a photo that Olivia posted on social media 11 months before the canceled wedding, both of us at the venue when we'd first toured it, her showing off the engagement ring, both of us smiling like we'd won the lottery. Sometimes I look at that photo and try to reconcile the people in it with what I know now. Was she already talking to Garrett again when that photo was taken? Was she already conflicted, already lying, already building the double life that would eventually implode? Or did that come later? A gradual erosion rather than a sudden betrayal? I'll never know the exact timeline of when she decided I wasn't enough, when she started looking backward instead of forward, when she chose deception over honesty. What I do know is that every smiling photo, every loving text, every moment of apparent happiness was potentially compromised by things I couldn't see. That knowledge changed how I look at everything now, made me more skeptical and less trusting, which is both a curse and a protection. The rehearsal dinner revelation was a year and a half ago now. The wedding date has passed, been forgotten by most people, occasionally remembered by me on quiet nights when I'm feeling reflective. I'm dating again, cautiously, taking things slowly, listening carefully to both what people say and what they do, watching for any discrepancy between words and actions. I'm probably more guarded than I need to be, probably projecting Olivia's capacity for deception onto people who don't deserve that suspicion. The therapist says this is normal, that trust rebuilds slowly after fundamental betrayal, that I shouldn't rush the process. So I don't. I take my time, I pay attention, I refuse to ignore red flags just because acknowledging them would be inconvenient. And if that means I end up alone rather than in another relationship built on lies, that's a trade I'm willing to make. The thing about discovering infidelity through an open app is how random and mundane the catalyst was. Olivia didn't confess in a moment of guilt. She didn't slip up in some dramatic confrontation. She just forgot to close a messaging app before setting down her phone, one tiny moment of carelessness that unraveled months of careful deception. That's how most lies get exposed, I've realized. Not through dramatic revelations or detective work, but through small mistakes and technological failures and the sheer exhausting difficulty of maintaining perfect dishonesty. Eventually, something slips. Eventually, the truth finds a crack to seep through. I just got lucky that the crack appeared before I'd legally bound myself to someone who saw marriage as a contingency plan rather than a commitment. The unmuted phone call, the open app, the visible message thread. Such tiny failures, such massive consequences. That's the thing about truth in the digital age. It's always there, waiting to be discovered, just one unlocked screen away from destroying everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.